Good morning. Thank all of you for coming out this morning for Playbook Breakfast. We really appreciate it. Welcome all of you in live stream land and welcome all of you on C-SPAN. We appreciate C-SPAN carrying this Politico breakfast. I'm joined by my colleague Darius Dixon, one of our great energy reporters, one of our great young politicos. We're so thrilled that we're bringing Darius's expertise to this event. Darius, tell us what's, for those who aren't in the front row, tell us what's on your tie.
Well, it's my favorite periodic table tie.
So,
and as many of you who've looked for one, there's not many very not tacky ones. So.
All Politico reporters have expertise, but Darius has gone the extra mile. Darius has 4 degrees. He calls himself over-degreed, been to a lot of commencements because in high school you wanted to be
a physics professor.
So we're honored to have Darius here to talk with Secretary of Energy Ernest Moniz. And fun fact, Darius actually once applied to the Department of Energy. You wanted to be a...
I basically had tried to go in for entry-level physical scientist job.
Very neat. So that's a first among our Playbook Breakfast questions. Before we start, I'd like to thank Robert Albritton, who's here. Without Robert Albritton, there'd be no Politico, so we're grateful to him. Thank you for Politico, Robert, and thank you for being here this morning. Before we kick off, I'd also like to thank the Bank of America for their continued support of Playbook Breakfast. Jim Mahoney, who's going to speak to us in just a second, has been a personal champion of Playbook Breakfast over 5 years. Such an amazing series, traveled now all around the country with Playbook Breakfast, bringing amazing guests like Secretary Moniz. So we're grateful to Bank of America. John Collingwood is also here. We appreciate Bank of America for this continued partnership. And here with a few quick opening words is Jim Mahoney, Global Corporate Communications and Public Policy Executive. Jim, thank you so much for your support of Playbook Breakfast.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of my colleagues, John and others at Bank of America, I just want to once again thank Mike and Robert for the partnership that we've had over 5 years now, putting on Playbook Breakfasts, where we've brought some of the most important and leading government officials and policymakers to the stage for very direct and important conversations that Mike has had over the years. And today our subject is energy, which I think we're all keenly aware is a critical issue facing our country and facing the world. And it's a central part of Bank of America's responsible growth strategy. And in that light, I think we've all come to realize that cooperation between the public sector and the private sector is the only way we're going to solve the world's energy problems, and in particular, the impact on climate change as a result of our energy production. And nobody knows that better than Secretary Moniz, who is here today. I feel a little bit like I've been stalking Secretary Moniz over the course of the last year or so. Before the Paris summit, where an historic agreement was made amongst 194 nations, Bank of America was one of 13 large U.S. companies to go to the White House and participate in the American Business Pledge on climate change, in which we all made major pledges of capital and other resources to address this question. Then we traveled to Paris, where we engaged on the sidelines of the COP21 deliberations to discuss the need to attract capital to address the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And then in 2 weeks out in California, the Clean Energy Ministerial is bringing together again climate ministers from around the world as a follow-up meeting to COP21, and Secretary Moniz will be a central player in that in a meeting that's being hosted by California Governor Jerry Brown, so we're looking forward to that. So once again, just the cooperation between the public sector and the private sector. There's a huge need for private capital to come into this space. We're working hard with Secretary Moniz and the administration and others to try to accomplish that. And I just want to say thank you to him for all the work that he's done. And I want to again thank Mike and Robert for the partnership with Politico. Thank you very much.
Jim, thank you very much. Appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thank you, John Collingwood. Really appreciate it. And now we're honored to welcome Secretary Moniz. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
So I'm here.
Really appreciate your coming out, Mr. Secretary. And we were just thanking the Bank of America for their support at the Sam Nunn Policy Forum in Atlanta. You joked about your monthly support for the Bank of America.
They bill me multiple times per month, actually.
We're honored to have you here, and Darius is going to.
I've made the same comment about Pepco, about a whole bunch of others.
Darius is going to kick off our questioning.
Okay. So, your counterparts overseas obviously watch our presidential election. As a non-proliferation guy, what did they say to you, or what kind of concerns did they raise with you when they hear someone like Donald Trump talk very casually about using nuclear weapons, or that maybe more countries should have them?
Well, look, let me make it very clear. I'm not going to comment on any candidate's individual positions, but obviously there's a lot of, shall we say, attention paid to what's going on in the United States. A lot of, let's face it, a lot of concern and confusion over the political discourse going on. But our job is to reiterate, first of all, what our policies are, and certainly in the non-proliferation front. As you know, the president has made this really a front burner issue in the international community in a way that it was not. So the Nuclear Security Summit series, of course, we just had the fourth here, end of March, beginning of April, and fantastic turnout. I mean, over 50 countries, many of them at the leader level, and there was no issue about what our position is, and it is to reduce the amount of nuclear material and to work towards the president's vision of, admittedly over a long time frame, working towards at least actually the elimination of nuclear weapons. So that's clearly our policy to address proliferation. And again, we've put it, the president in particular has really put this on the front burner for international leadership the way it was not before.
And Mr. Secretary, as we talk to intelligence officials, your colleagues in the cabinet, they say that when they talk to their counterparts, either in person or by secure phone, video conference, their counterparts always ask the same question. They want to know about Trump. Have you experienced that?
As I said, I'm not going to comment about the policies of any individual candidate. There is concern over the level of political discourse. Let me just leave it at that today.
For those of you joining us in live stream land, please tweet us your questions. Darius and I have our Twitter machines here, hashtag Playbook Breakfast. So hashtag Playbook Breakfast, send us your questions and we'll ask the Secretary. Jim mentioned the 7th Clean Energy Ministerial coming up June 1st and 2nd in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. You will be there. What is job one for you in the Bay Area?
Actually, I'll answer that and add to it, because it turns out we're having multiple events taking advantage of the venue and of having so many ministers there from the Clean Energy Ministerial. So let me just first say, the Clean Energy Ministerial is a meeting, the 7th, as you said, that is really addressing, first of all, it's 23 countries that represent most of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, plus the EU, and it really is focused on deployment of clean energy technologies and policies. So, for example, one of the major focus areas is on lighting. It's had a major influence in how India has adopted an aggressive program for LED deployment. China as well has made a pledge for over 5 billion LEDs deployed, on the way to a clean energy ministerial pledge of 10 billion LEDs. We've also had a very successful program, I think, that is run out of our National Renewable Laboratory called the Energy Solutions Center, which has provided advice, including a new clean energy financing portal, gives advice especially to developing countries in terms of how to engineer policies going forward. So what I want to emphasize, it is a kind of a focus on deployment. However, because 19 of the 20 countries in mission innovation are part of the Clean Energy Ministerial, we are interleaving this with the very first meeting of that coalition. In a word, the Mission Innovation Coalition is 20 countries that were announced. It was announced on the first day of the Paris meeting by President Obama and 19 other national leaders that we would seek in all of those countries a doubling of the energy R&D portfolio, clean energy R&D portfolio. So the idea here is this is much more innovation focused, so it's got a longer time horizon than the Clean Energy Ministerial. So these are very complementary, even though the nations involved have a strong overlap. So we'll combine that, and I just want to add that in the Bay Area, not surprising, it's one of our obviously hotbeds of technology, innovation, and investment. The third thing I do want to add is going back to the Clean Energy Ministerial, on May 31st, so the day before, we will host with Stanford a major meeting on women in clean energy. And we think that's very important. We've put a robust program in place, and we're emphasizing now a stronger commitment in this direction internationally. So it's going to be a very exciting 3 days, actually, with multiple themes all interleaved.
And another one of these themes, California Governor Jerry Brown also is hosting a meeting on subnational agreements. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen there?
So Governor Brown, as you said, just that they are committed to a movement with a very strong subnational, both city and state/regional governments coming together to commit to the sub 2 degrees centigrade objective that was featured at Paris. So he will be having a meeting focusing on those issues. For example, I know some of my colleagues, if you like, in the energy business will be there talking about how to bring, just a couple back to that lighting issue, how to bring electricity services to the billion-plus people who don't have them in developing countries. So there's multiple threads all coming together.
And last one on this, and then Darius is going to jump in. You mentioned the Bay Area is the hotbed, Silicon Valley is the hotbed of innovation.
I said a hotbed.
As a hotbed, or the rise of the rest, as Steve Case would.
Boston is a major additional. Right?
Or minus 128, right? While you're out there, are you going to drive a Tesla?
I'm ready. 0 to 60 in 5+ seconds sounds pretty good. But I have to admit, I've never driven one, so we will have a tour. So the ministers on the afternoon of the 31st, we will be going to Tesla, and Elon Musk will introduce us to that model. Actually, the other thing is what I have driven is, you can look at our website, what I have driven is a 3D printed little sports car, if you like, and that's a little bit of a sign of the future as well. Yeah, so it's a good reaction. I like it. So it's a whole big 3D printed thing.
I mean, I've heard of printing toothbrushes.
Very efficient.
Car?
Oh yes,
yeah. Oak Ridge, right?
So this is Oak Ridge together with a firm in Cincinnati, which developed the technology for this, and that's really that's the idea. And of course, functionally, the idea is this will be a much more efficient way, ultimately, of minimizing the embedded energy in constructing this kind of a large device.
And what did that feel like? Could you tell? Did it feel like a normal car, or what did it feel like?
Well, let me emphasize, of course, it's an electric vehicle, and it's a normal vehicle. I should emphasize, like the battery was not 3D printed. It was the body, and it was quite exciting, actually.
And I think the ministers are also going to Google while you're out there.
And to Google, correct. And some will be taking part as well in the Women in Clean Energy. We will also have on Friday morning after the meeting, we will have some meetings with the investor community. I should say that the Clean Energy Ministerial last year was held in Mexico. We are hosting it this year, obviously in the last year of the Obama administration, but also for continuity and to maintain effectiveness, China will host it in 2017.
Well, to sort of bounce off of your comments on China and technology, a lot of energy technologies are developed here in the U.S., but when it comes to deployment, China and a lot of other countries seem to be much better at that. And so what could we be doing better, or what are we doing wrong in terms of deploying technology?
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean, Darius, I mean, we have a pretty robust deployment. Solar energy is up 20x in deployment over the beginning of the Obama administration. Wind is 3x. LEDs went from basically 0 to 100 million deployed in the last, just in the last 3-4 years. And in all those 3 cases, a major piece is the cost reduction. And the cost reduction has been driven by a combination of technology innovation and this deployment ramp up, which kind of work together in terms of lowering costs. So I think there's quite a bit there. Now, we also help that in a variety of ways, obviously by supporting the technology innovation, but in addition, things like our loan program have been specifically about getting technologies out there helping ramp up. The poster child for that is the loan program activity in large-scale, utility-scale photovoltaics, where the program in 2009, 2010 provided the debt financing for the very first 100 megawatt plus 5 of these deployments, and now I believe it's 28 additional ones that are being put forward through private sector financing. So that's the idea: kickstart it, get it going. Second point is the importance of this is that, and as you said, other countries in the deployment arena also pushing hard, is look, the Paris Agreement. And here, let me just put aside the climate arguments, et cetera, which are obviously the core of it, but let me just put that aside for a moment. I would say the fact is, when you've got 185 countries all committed to lowering greenhouse gas emissions, the already robust market for clean energy technologies is only going to grow even faster. We're talking about trillion-dollar scale markets for these deployments, and if nothing else, that alone is a motivation for our maintaining our innovation edge, frankly, so that we can also take a lead role in those international markets.
Secretary, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about the future of energy consumption here at home, and then Darius, I think, may ask us about Iran or some other questions overseas. You did a great interview with Politico's Michael Grunwald for our agenda section, a new policy-driven part of Politico.com that was started by our editor, Susan Glasser, and you said, we are definitely headed toward a cleaner future, and it had a great headline. It said, Ernest Moniz is about as wildly optimistic as a cabinet secretary is allowed to be. Do you plead guilty to being optimistic?
I'm a physicist. I am inherently optimistic, but also committed to the laws of physics, which is, well, I won't get into that. I already promised I would not get into that earlier in our discussion. No, I am optimistic, and again, there are many underpinnings of that. Certainly, one of them is this idea that continued technology innovation is going to keep driving down these costs. It's been very, very dramatic. I mentioned wind, solar, LEDs, but I can also mention things like batteries and storage. We have seen a 60 to 70% drop in the cost of batteries over the last 6-7 years as well. Now, you mentioned Tesla. Sure, on the one hand, those costs are still not at the stage where either for the vehicle market or for the, let's say, large-scale grid storage, where we see it, kind of going viral, if you like, in those markets. But on the other hand, I mean, we have to pay attention. There is a lot happening there. You mentioned Tesla, and I'll use that, but although, of course, as you know, there are many companies pursuing both electric vehicles, battery electric vehicles and fuel cell vehicles. In fact, as an aside on the side, look, 5 years ago, fuel cell vehicles were somewhere way in the future. Now there's, I don't know, probably 5 models commercially available just in a few years. But again, take Tesla. It wasn't that long ago that their business model of going for, frankly, a rather expensive, very high performance vehicle aimed at therefore a fairly narrow market. As you know, they've now announced a model that has a base price below $40,000. That's an enormous change on the way, presumably to further cost reduction. So that is a key issue. This cost reduction is big. The last comment I'll make there is to put it back in context. If we go back to Paris, frankly, and this mission innovation announcement that I discussed earlier, mission innovation commitment, and what I didn't mention was the parallel coalition put together by Bill Gates, as we kind of worked in parallel on these 2 coalitions, and that's an interesting story in itself, this so-called Breakthrough Energy Coalition. But put it in a big context, certainly in the United States, going back to early in 2015, we committed to elevating the innovation agenda as part of the road to Paris, because while Paris was a critical first step in heading to the clean energy future, we all understand that the commitments made in Paris were for 10 to 15-year horizon. And beyond that, we're going to need to double down and double down to get to a really low carbon footprint in the decades ahead and going to mid-century and beyond. An underpinning of that increased ambition is going to be this technology innovation that continues to drive down costs. That's especially critical, certainly for developing economies where that cost equation is going to be critical. So this is a very important platform for beyond Paris. And yeah, I'm optimistic because I think the technology innovation pipeline is going to open up and it's going to drive this cost reduction even more.
This may be the most important question that we ask today. What is the likelihood that those United States commitments that you were just referring to will live past President Obama?
Well, again, I'm optimistic, and there are 2 reasons for that, 2 fundamental reasons for that. One, we've just discussed. The innovation agenda is going to make this clean energy future much more attractive, both for climate reasons and for things like energy security. I remind you, let's say renewables, nuclear, et cetera, and I'm not talking about the United States only, but let's say our European allies who have obvious energy security challenges. This is an agenda that helps that as well. So there's multiple agendas that are being helped. Secondly, and I've said this before, I believe that Mother Nature is speaking to us with a louder and louder voice about the need to address these issues, and frankly, to work hard at mitigation, but unfortunately, also defining an adaptation agenda because of what we are seeing.
And what is Mother Nature saying? What are you referring to when you talk about?
Well, for example, if we go back to set it up, if we go back now decades, the increasing refinement of climate science has predicted, statistically predicted exactly the kinds of patterns we are seeing for dramatically amplified effects of extreme weather, for example. And again, you don't have to argue about this. For example, there's no issue about sea levels having risen. There's no issue about those seas being warmer. Well, if you've got higher, warmer seas and a tropical storm comes in, let's call it Sandy for a generic name, for example, the impacts are amplified dramatically, nothing else. But then there's the patterns of drought, there's the patterns of disease vectors increasing. Look what's happening to the western forests. If you look at modeling done years ago, for example, at our Los Alamos lab, they indicate the impacts on the western forests. It's not pretty from a much warmer world. So that's what I mean about Mother Nature talking to us.
When you put it that way, even a liberal arts major can understand it.
Good. How about him? He's a scientist. In fact, he could have been a scientist.
Right.
Right.
I'm a heretic.
Well, that's right. Actually, I have several questions for you, Darius, about this. Right.
Go ahead.
Well, I want to change the subject a little bit, go to Iran.
I don't blame you.
So last month's announcement that the Energy Department was going to purchase several tons of heavy water from Iran nearly derailed a spending bill in the Senate. And because a lot of lawmakers were concerned that the administration was going to buy more heavy water. I guess, can you say definitively whether this administration is not going to buy more heavy water from Iran?
Yeah, we made it quite clear. But, Darius, I think it's important to kind of frame the issue, make sure people understand. So, obviously, the agreement with Iran, the JCPOA, has required a dramatic rollback of the Iranian nuclear establishment. To do that, a whole bunch of stuff had to leave Iran. 10 tons of low-enriched uranium, 20% enriched uranium, heavy water, because we put a restriction on that as well, and they had more stuff already on hand. A number of the P5+1, and in fact beyond the P5+1, have stepped forward to enable compliance with the issue, with the agreement. Among that is, frankly, for a relatively low total cost and a very competitive set of commercial terms, we said that we would facilitate the first purchase of some of this heavy water purely for our needs at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, for a very inexpensive enhancement of the capabilities of our neutron source, and for resale at cost to companies. The heavy water is widely used in industry, including in the United States. So we said that we would facilitate a first purchase and a first purchase only of that, because the reality is Iran, obviously not only in heavy water, but Iran has, because of the sanctions, for many years not been engaged in this international market. So we facilitate that. It's in the spirit of wanting all of us to be able to comply with this very important agreement. So that's the situation, and we are still in the process of executing that first transaction.
Okay. Well, and the administration takes this as the Iran deal as a legacy issue, and I wanted to get at your legacy at DOE. You've tried to kind of rearrange things at DOE. I mean, what are the check boxes that you're still trying to get done before you leave or before January 2017?
Well, let me first comment on the legacy issue and the Iran deal. Yeah, sure, it's a legacy issue for the administration, and I would say also for the Department of Energy and our national laboratories, which have underpinned our work on the deal. But I want to emphasize, more than a legacy issue, it is about providing confidence that Iran is not pursuing a nuclear weapon. That's the real issue, and the only issue about the JCPOA. It's about taking the existential threat off the table, while not providing any kind of a free pass, if you like, on all the other issues that trouble us in terms of Iranian regional behavior. Now, in terms of other issues that are legacy issues, understanding legacy issue to be based upon value, I think an important one certainly is this innovation agenda that we've already discussed in great detail, including, for example, the very strong commitment to programs like ARPA-E. And you may have noticed that in the Senate Energy and Water discussions, which you alluded to a few minutes ago, of a couple of weeks ago, by an overwhelming bipartisan vote, the ARPA-E budget was increased by about 12% in that bill. Again, I'd be happy to come back and discuss that. That's, I think, a major advancement for a program started only in this administration. It remains a young program. Another is that I believe we have been good stewards of advancing our role as part of the backbone of the American science establishment, with our continuing to support and build new facilities that are always at the edge and serve the science community. Among those is our commitment to developing high-performance computing, a long-standing contribution to advancement in this country. Specifically, we committed hundreds of millions of dollars last year to go to what's called the 100 petaflop scale, and to go to the exascale. Exascale means a billion operations per second by the beginning of the next century. That's why I said a billion. 10 to the 18th. I mean, this is enormous. But what I want to emphasize is that it sounds like, okay, so you got a few more flops. But the reality is each of these major steps requires incredible innovation. For example, you need more than an order of magnitude reduction in the energy requirements per operation. You need to do new computer architectures. We need to understand how to handle big data analytics at an enormous scale. We're going to apply this to cancer. And it's going to require things like cancer, by the way, is roughly speaking a big data problem right now. So we are in the heart of that. Anyway, I could go on, but there's across the board, and in fact, actually, I will say one more.
But January 2017, what are you trying to do before then or by then?
Well, first of all, solidify all of these. No, I mean, look, I mean, at this stage, with 8 months left, you know, I would say the weighting is more towards developing and presenting the opportunities for continuation of many of these, as opposed to, you know, de novo, brand new initiatives. Now, you could argue the cancer initiative is kind of in that camp, but it's really based upon what we've been doing in terms of large-scale computation. Another important one that we are actively working to solidify is, I do believe that we have changed, I would say maybe gone back to the future in terms of a much more strategic partnership with our national laboratory system. We have 17 national laboratories, and as you well know, we've discussed this before, the Department of Energy, in its nuclear security mission, in its energy technology mission, in its science mission, in its environmental cleanup mission, diverse missions, they're all science and technology. The laboratory system is the kind of the thread that runs all through them, and we have, I think, reestablished much more a way of working strategically with the laboratories to advance those missions.
In 2 questions, we're going to go to my colleague, Andrew Restuccio, who's here in the front row. We're going to get him a microphone. But first, Mr. Secretary, in November 2011, you'd been Undersecretary of Energy. You were back at MIT as a physics professor. We just had the nuclear accident in Japan. You wrote a piece in Foreign Affairs called "Why We Still Need Nuclear Power." Is that also true for the United States today?
Oh, yes, we believe it is. Absolutely. The president has made that clear, that nuclear is part of the portfolio. And there are two issues. One is that we need to continue to focus on the question of the existing nuclear power plants, which have been responsible for an enormous part of our non-carbon electricity generation now for decades. They are in parts of the country under considerable challenge. And by the way, the origin of that challenge is basically the very low natural gas prices in competitive markets. On the other side, we need to focus on what can be the future of nuclear power. We have 5 plants being built right now in the Southeast. They're in the Southeast, again, for reasons that are the flip side of what I talked about in terms of competitive markets. It's kind of a structure that allows cost recovery for these enormous capital investments, and that's the reality. But it's also about innovation again. So, for example, we have been supporting the development of small modular reactors, like a 50-megawatt reactor, that will go to the NRC this year for design certification. And that could be starting to get deployed in this next decade. And in addition to technical characteristics like very good safety characteristics, it may change the financial engineering equation if you are able to build much smaller plants without the lumpiness of the capital investment. So we're working hard at that across the board.
Secretary Moniz, last month you spoke to the National Coal Council, and in your remarks there, you acknowledged the tough times in significant parts of coal country. What would you say to the hardworking Americans in coal country?
Well, again, there's no, it's a fact that the amount of coal use has gone down pretty significantly in the United States. The coal market share of electricity generation has fallen from 51% to 33, 34% in a decade. And in fact, 2016 is predicted by the EIA to be the first year in which gas will surpass coal in terms of market share. So there's no doubt that there's a reduction in coal use, and that hits communities that have been traditionally reliant on that. So what I emphasized as well is that quite the contrary from the alleged war on coal, what we have done in terms of promoting or enabling coal to play a role in a low carbon future. We have invested billions of dollars in programs around carbon capture and sequestration and utilization. We have proposed to the Congress roughly $5 billion of tax credits for carbon capture. We, the administration, has put forward a Power Plus plan that is specifically aimed at these communities in terms of financial assistance, in terms of retraining, et cetera. We held, I think it was our first regional meeting on mission innovation in Kentucky. And the reason is that in our mission innovation implementation plan, we propose formation of regional technology partnerships, literally clean energy portfolios with a funding stream from the federal government that would be managed regionally to address regional needs. So obviously, if you have a regional meeting that's in coal country, you might expect those technologies to play a central role. So we are addressing this in many, many ways. I might say also that 2 years ago, we brought in top flight people, including the first executive director of the Green-Blue Alliance, Blue-Green Alliance, actually, Dave Foster, to form a job strategy entity in the department. So we are focused on also the jobs equation, including with labor. As an example, we have formed a partnership with labor unions to provide technical assistance for labor working with states on state implementation plans for the Clean Power Plan to make sure job creation is maximized. We have a strong manufacturing initiative. So I could go on in terms of that jobs focus.
And as you talked to Workaday Kentuckians on that trip, I'm sure you heard that a lot of them are very unhappy. Like they don't see this full case you're making here. How did the administration get on the wrong side of that story in coal country?
Well, again, one way of getting on the wrong side is to have others talk about the programs in a way that does not reflect, frankly, the reality of their purpose or implementation. So we have obviously tried, and I guess I'm doing it right now, trying to tell the story about what we are doing on coal. But you know, we never say anything other than the reality that we are committed to a low carbon future. I mean, that's what we need to do. But we emphasize that every pathway is part of our enabling that low carbon future. Again, whether it's coal, renewables, nuclear, and certainly energy efficiency. So it's across the board, and we are enabling it. I mean, we're putting you know, our money where our mouth is. So I would follow the money and not follow all the mouths.
I like it. Darius and our colleagues at Politico have such a strong energy team. Energy was one of the first 3 Politico pros. Back in the day, one of our great young reporters is Andrew Stuccia, who's here and has a question for the secretary.
Donald Trump said yesterday that he wants to renegotiate the Paris climate deal if he's elected. Is it possible to renegotiate a deal that has been signed by 170 countries, including the United States? And separately, and also, how important is it for the deal to go into force this year, given that threat? And separately, Exxon is under investigation by several states over what it knew about climate change. What's your take on that investigation, and do you think Exxon is at risk of suffering a huge multi-billion-dollar settlement?
Well, you won't be surprised by the prologue to my answer being that, again, that I'm not going to comment on any individual candidates' positions, and nor am I going to comment on some litigation going on. But I think some answers of some relevance are that, first of all, with regard to the Paris Agreement, clearly we have essentially every country in the world having made some INDCs, or now NDCs, nationally determined contributions, and are moving forward with that. But I remind you that there is within the agreement a mechanism for revisiting it, in the sense of 5-year revisits, with the idea that countries, hopefully, as costs go down for technologies, will be having greater ambition going forward as we meet increasingly stringent targets for the years and decades ahead. In terms of industry, I continue to feel that we will. In fact, let me say, the president said in June of 2013, when he announced the Climate Action Plan, a preface to that, he said, we would like to work with Congress in terms of a legislative approach, but until that happens, we can't wait. Again, the call of Mother Nature, if you like. And so we are moving forward with a strong program based on existing authorities. That's what's happening. On the other hand, I think and I believe we will reach, in the next years, we will reach in a kind of an economy-wide legislative approach. And I believe the additional certainty that can provide industry for the long term will help industry in its planning. I think, to be honest, I think most of industry has basically understood that we are moving in this direction. And the more certain, and many of the companies, including the petroleum companies, we all know they have been using an internal price of carbon in many of their investment decisions now for years. And so getting as much certainty as we can get in there, I think the better it will be for industry in terms of, are all pursuing the same goal.
The parties taking on Exxon have used the playbook that was used against tobacco. Do you see any parallels between industry and tobacco?
Again, I'm not going to comment on that issue, which is obviously involved in litigation. I would say that I believe that that there are a lot of companies, certainly among especially the largest corporations, that recognize the path that we are following, that the world is following, and many of them have been already acting in their internal decision-making around a low-carbon future, and I think we just need to provide, get past the arguments. As you know, I've said many times, I have no interest in debating what's not debatable, and let's get on with the implementation and do it with the certainty that provides corporate leaders the opportunity to do what they always have to do, which is make corporate decisions based upon uncertainty. But let's take out this uncertainty and provide a trajectory for carbon reductions.
So regardless of who becomes president, how much damage would it do for any president to walk away or ignore the deal in Paris?
Well, again, that's a hypothetical, which I don't expect to come. And because for one thing, and that's not a statement about outcome of the election, it is a statement that, look, for one thing, we have put forward as a basis of the Climate Action Plan a whole set of rulemakings, for example, in multiple sectors that have followed the stringent requirements of a rulemaking. Those are in law, and those are not arbitrarily reversed. I'll give you an anecdote from my first time around the track. At the end of the Clinton administration, when I was undersecretary, towards the end of the administration, we put out a final efficiency rule on central air conditioners. And there was a long argument, including with industry. You know, it was a big argument based upon whether the increase in efficiency would be 20% or 30%. It was not about the fundamentals of an increase in efficiency. It was over the last 10%. That was put in place following a 2-year rulemaking process, something like that. When the next administration came in, one of the first things they did was to announce the rollback of that standard from the 30% we put forward to 20%. The courts took that out. You cannot change that unless you go through the entire new rulemaking process. In that case, it would have been ironic to lower the standard. It never happened. That standard is in place.
But everybody I think knows that the Environmental Protection Agency gets a lot of attention on climate, but as you said, there are these efficiency rules in your agency, and those actually account for half of the president's climate goals. Are you all still on track to finalize those rules before January? Enough to make that goal?
So first of all, it's not new for this year that we've kind of picked up the pace. Last year, 2015, we finalized 13 rules. We expect to finalize just about the same number this year. And to give a scale, since not everyone's familiar with it, as you said, it's a big deal. These rules may sometimes individually sound like they are small bore, standby power for microwaves and the like.
Air conditioners,
air conditioners, electric motors. Some of them are big, some of them are smaller in terms of impact. But the projection is that the appliance and equipment efficiency rules that the department will put forward over the Obama administration will project out to a cumulative consumer savings of over $500 billion to 2030 and a carbon avoided reduction of nearly 3 billion tons of CO2. So these are big numbers when you apply these standards across the board.
Mr. Secretary, last question, and then we're going to do a quick rapid round to say goodbye. This is a question about low gas prices from Louisa Savage, Politico's editorial director of events.
Gasoline or natural gas?
Gasoline. Thank you for your precision. Louisa's here. The question is, how much damage have low energy prices done to investment in energy efficiency and the rollout of those electric vehicles we were talking about at the top?
Well, first of all, low gasoline prices, excuse me, clearly have impacted things like some of the electric vehicle sales. But I do want to first clarify that often it's said, what is the impact of low gasoline prices on renewables, and I want to make clear that the impact is not large at all on electricity generating renewables, solar and wind, because petroleum is not part of our electricity sector, essentially. So it does impact things like the competitiveness of next generation biofuels. We continue to develop those, but we have, as with any of these, a common theme in developing these new technologies. You start out needing a cost reduction trajectory, and that's where we are. Low gasoline prices move the bar a little bit, but it's the same fundamental issue. And I want to say, economy-wide, again, we should not lose track of the fact that our energy productivity, energy use per unit GDP, continues to drop substantially, and we've been committed to a trajectory of, again, doubling energy productivity gains over this next decade.
We're about to get the hook here, so we're going to close with a quick rapid round. This is another question from Louisa, and the notes she sent me. It says, Washington physicist, WTF, question mark? The actual question is, you are a physicist, your predecessor...
Explain this to me, Darius.
Behind the curtain.
I shouldn't.
Behind the curtain. You're a physicist, your predecessor was a physicist, now the defense secretary is a physicist. What's going on? Are you giving the lawyers a run for their money?
Well, I view the world as physicists and applied physicists. So I can only endorse this move towards full physicist.
Mr. Secretary, you have a new nickname, Slapshot. Tell us why.
The Department of Energy has a MOU with the National Hockey League, who has and the National Hockey League, and by the way, I might also say another one with NASCAR, and they have both been very aggressive in pursuing energy efficiency. For example, LED lighting in NHL arenas, for example. So last month they had a week celebrating green energy, and I was asked to do a little jumbotron film advocating the green energy agenda, and then actually at my alma mater's rink, Boston College, displaying a fabulous, even if rusty, slap shot, lower right-hand corner, following, by the way, a wrist shot into the upper left-hand corner, unfortunately missed by the cameraman. But I honestly, it's true.
In June, you will have been married for 43 years to your wife, Naomi, a retired Georgetown professor of Portuguese and Brazilian studies and women's studies. In decades, there is something that only your wife has done for you.
You know the answer.
Go ahead.
It's not a haircut. She cuts my hair.
Twitter does love your hair.
QED, yeah.
On Twitter, they debate whether you're Einstein, Beethoven, or the Quaker oatmeal man.
My version is that when my research wasn't going so well, the Einstein look was much more easily achieved.
You threw out the first pitch at Fenway. You're a big Red Sox fan. How much did you practice for your first pitch?
We had 3 major spring training events. I did play a lot of baseball when I was young, but it was a 50-year rustiness. But I want to emphasize that I certainly needed 3 because I decided to take on the responsibility of doing a Louis Tiant delivery. Those of you old enough to remember Louis Tiant can recall it was a 180-degree rotation, a look to God, and then a three-quarter wheel and deal, and we did it. And then Louis was there at the game, and we had he's a wonderful person, and had a terrific discussion. People forget, by the way, still arguably the greatest World Series of all time, 1975, which the Red Sox lost to the heavily favored Big Red Machine in Cincinnati, and Louis Tiant was pitched in all 3 games the Red Sox won. But unfortunately, he didn't pitch in the other 4 games. Right.
And tell them about the baseball card that you had in your pocket as you threw out the first pitch.
Well, yes, knowing that I was doing that, I needed a Louis Tiant baseball card for good luck, and I didn't know he was going to be there, and so he signed it, and it's that and my number 23 jersey are in my office today.
And Mr. Secretary, as we say goodbye, you're a man of many talents, many pursuits. You are also in an adult men's soccer league. How is soccer like life?
The first way it's like life is this league is called the Over the Hill Soccer League, and playing in the over 63 division is, you know, interesting. But no, look, it's great. I mean, it's huge fun. First of all, you know, it's a team that's put together from many different walks of life, many different professions, etc. Different teams also have different characters, and it's just great fun going out there, and obviously a little bit of a chance to take out some aggression.
How would you describe your style of play?
Bad. Right.
Not the Louis Tiant of soccer.
Darius, Dixon, thank you for your great coverage and your great questions today. We'd like to thank all of you in live stream land who joined us. Thanks C-SPAN for carrying Politico Playbook breakfast. We appreciate that very much. We thank our Politico events colleagues who pull off multiple miracles every week. Always grateful for our events colleagues. Thank Robert Albritton for coming today. Without him, no Politico. I always hashtag my emails to Robert. TYFP, thank you for Politico. We'd like to thank the Bank of America for making this series possible. Jim Mahoney, John Collingwood, your colleagues for supporting the Playbook Breakfast series. Thank all of you for coming this morning. And Mr. Secretary, thank you for a fantastic conversation.
Thank you. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you so much. You were great. Really appreciate it.